Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Philipp. Today we have with us again Bill Whittle. Bill, real pleasure having you back on.
Great to be here.
And today we're going to be talking about Marvel as the American mythology and why it matters that these big studios are starting to introduce social justice into it, turning it all political and changing the nature of that mythology. Bill, this is of course based off something you mentioned in a previous episode we did, the idea of Marvel being an American mythology. And I mean, that's an interesting concept. Tell us about this.
Yeah, Marvel has recently, MCU, the Marvel Comics universe, has recently just been incredible. I think they did 22 movies just on this timeline that just ended. It was really an amazing volume of work and a lot of really good work too. I think probably it's more accurate to say that the cultural mythology is a combination of things, of which Marvel is maybe now the biggest piece or one of the biggest pieces. But when I was working out here as a limousine driver for many years, when I first got out here, I had the chance to pick up DeForest Kelley, who played Dr. McCoy on the original Star Trek show. And we started chatting. He's a wonderful gentleman. And I said, Mr. Kelley, I don't know if it's really completely occurred to you, but do you realize that on some level, you're immortal. You're going to be here as long as there's electronics to play back the recordings. He's dead, Jim, and Dr. McCoy. They're part of the American mythology. It's not just a role. It's a iconic part of what we consider our mythology to be. And he said, I don't know if I really fully understood it that well, but he knew it was certainly different than the other roles he'd played. But it really does come down to that. Every society has to have their gods and their heroes. And we talk about these things as mythology. And mythology's had a pretty bum rap as a term because a lot of people have somehow managed to take the term myth and turn it into the same meaning as fraud. And that's certainly not the case. So, that's a myth. No, myths are super truth. They're a bigger truth than the truth. So just to put some of this in context, to give you a couple examples, it was said that George Washington once cut down a cherry tree, and when he was confronted by his father, he said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I cut down the cherry tree." He was also said as a young man he could throw a silver dollar across the Potomac River. Now, it turns out he didn't do either of these two things. So they weren't true, but they were super true. In other words, his fundamental honesty and integrity of character is something that would have had a kid say, "I chopped down the cherry tree." And his physical strength and stature, he's a huge man for those days especially, meant that if there was anybody who could throw a dollar across the Potomac, George Washington would have been the guy. So for people to say, "Oh, that's a myth, it didn't happen," they're missing the point. It's telling a bigger truth. It's telling I call it a super truth. And I think certainly Marvel Comics universe and Star Wars, Star Trek, all the rest of this pantheon of pop culture is our current society's mythology. And it's about time conservatives realize the power that controlling that has.
Interesting. And so if we get into the idea of, say, anthropology and so on, they talk about the mythos. And your mythos is the, say, system of stories, ideas, values that were given to you and that shape your values, your perspectives in life. Your ideas of what's right and wrong, your ideas of what is heroic, your ideas of what you should fight for. This is shaped by your mythos.
Well, for example, if you raise a population on movies like It's a Wonderful Life, you're going to get a certain kind of a society. If you raise them on a movie like Easy Rider, you're going to get another kind of society. One society is going to be, you could say, maybe naive and overly optimistic, but they're going to be decent people who believe in doing the right thing, and they're going to make an attempt to do that. The other society is going to be cynical and distrustful and kind of looking out for themselves. Family Guy is probably a better example than Easy Rider, but all of the cynicism in modern pop culture is creating a population that then goes on to create more pop culture, more of this mythos. So it is, in fact, a feedback loop. And that used to have me very worried until about maybe 18 months ago, when I started seeing what they did with The Last Jedi and Star Wars. And then all across the board, I realized that the left they're failing. They can't do it. They can't do it. It's not physically possible for them to turn people into what they want them to be. They can't do it even if they control the mythology. It's just not, you can't beat the biology out of people. And that's their fundamental problem, which is why they're so obsessed with this and why they're so hyperventilating now, that all of these movies have been a complete bomb. And we're starting to see signs already that Hollywood is turning the corner and starting to come back to give, well, starting with the fans, but basically give the American people back the kind of mythology they want, which is classic kind of Marvel Comics universe and classic Star Wars and classic Star Trek, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and well, in talking just to kind of finish up this point, talking briefly about the idea of how movies and entertainment affect our ideas of values and what we should aspire towards. I mean, if you were to hear, what is cool, what images come to your mind? It's very likely it's going to be something, a figure from a movie or that you've seen that represents that image that is desirable or seen as cool. If you're to look at what is, action-oriented, what does it mean to be tough? A lot of times it's not, maybe people in your life too, but very likely you also have a cultural image from a movie you've seen that shapes that idea of what it means to be tough. And when we get into things like Marvel, I think, now I think it's interesting to talk about what Marvel is. Now, Marvel comics have been around for a long time and really did shape a lot of the American culture for the last, more than 50 years now, something like that. But even with the films, the Marvel movies up until now have really stayed very close to the whole hero's journey. And I think that's part of why they've been so successful. They really do embody these traditional kind of images of, let's say, righteousness, patriotism, heroism, and these types of things. Now, what's your perspective on some of these different heroes we've seen in terms of what they represent for Americans?
Well, certainly you're right about that. The classic Marvel Comics heroes are traditional heroes. And I know there's a lot of people, specifically a lot of conservatives, who think, why all this talk about movies is just kind of irrelevant. What difference does it make? It's just a film. It's not just a film. We're not talking about movies. We're talking about our cultural mythology. I don't want to go retread that ground again, but basically, if you imagine that you had the ability to control the stories of Zeus and Heracles and Theseus and all that, if you had the ability to go back into Greek city-states and determine what they believed that their gods were doing, you'd have an enormous amount of power over those populations. Zeus wants this, Zeus wants that, okay? And so this is where the thing has the power that it has. It has the power, as you mentioned, of cool and tough. And so it's all peer pressure. People want to be like this, and people don't want to swim against the stream of what they see their heroes doing. So up until very recently, Marvel comic heroes were just super traditional heroes. I mean, Superman's a DC character, but you get Spider-Man, who's he's kind of like your adolescent superhero, but he has superpowers and he uses them for good, and all of them do. Captain America is a classic example of a character that was written quite a long time ago and seemed really almost like passé, almost like retrograde, like you couldn't possibly do a movie about Captain America, not in this day and age, but when the first one came out several years ago, it was a huge success. So to some degree, the studios learned from this. And every now and then in these films, and almost every single Marvel movie has at least one or two of these moments where I'd watch it and say, I can't believe they just said that. I can't believe they actually got away with saying that. I think there's a scene, I don't remember it very well. It's a scene in one of the Captain America movies where there's I think maybe it's a Loki or something. Some god comes into this airplane and he says, jumps out the back, and Captain America is told by somebody that he's a god, and Captain America says, not the God I believe in doesn't dress like that. Something along those lines, So you've got this fundamental sense of right and wrong. And when I talk about a feedback loop, all of these characters, all of the classic characters, are considerably older than the pop culture of today. They go back Spider-Man and Batman and all these guys, they go back quite a long way. Superman goes back to the 30s, I think. I should mention, by the way, that I'm not a comic book expert by any means. I don't know an awful lot about comic books, but I do know a lot about the intersection of the pop culture with politics. So you've got these traditional heroes, and most of them are male. And traditionally, up until now, they've all been straight males, and they've all been pretty much been straight white males. And that in itself is not important. But what is important is the left is taking the cultural identity of these characters and changing the fundamentals of them and hoping that the credibility and the power that fans have, or rather that these characters have over people's minds. People have been lifelong fans of Batman, let's say. So the left kind of thinks, well, now if we could just do a female Batman, not a Batgirl or anything. I mean, Batman is a woman now. Batman is a gay woman, and that's what Batman is. They think that if they do that all of the emotional power of Batman will come with them. And this is where they're in for, and where they're experiencing a rude awakening, because this is exactly what they're trying to do. They just finished this Infinity War thing, which I think was a 22 movie, series all told. And so they're basically starting, not from scratch, but they're going to have to basically build a whole new Marvel Comics universe now. And one of the things that I'd heard was happening is that the character of Thor, who was played by Chris Hemsworth, big, strong, strapping guy, because he's a Norse god. The story is that that character is now going to be played by Natalie Portman. She's going to be Thor, and she's going to wield a hammer that weighs more than she does. And we're expected to believe that just because that she's got the hammer and she's got the Thor outfit, that she's Thor, or she's the Thor substitute anyway. And we're supposed that the left actually thinks that people will come along with this, that they'll play along. Oh, okay, so that's Thor now. Sure, nobody buys it. Nobody buys it. And the record of failures on these things has been tremendous. If you take a character, however, like Wonder Woman, and you do that character right, and you let her have some weaknesses and some failures and some setbacks, so she has something to overcome, you make a great movie out of a female superhero character that's designed to be a superhero female. But if you start taking these existing male characters or whatever they are and start trying to fundamentally change them and shoehorn them into this, the left thought they could get away with it, and they can't. The next James Bond is going to be a black woman. And they say, well, it's not really her name's not James Bond, but she's 007. This is a distinction without a difference. The James Bond is not a black woman. 007 is not a black woman. It's not going to work, and nobody expects it to work except for these people who live in their echo chamber of magical thinking, where they think that if we just give people enough raps on the head and just keep hitting them hard enough, sooner or later they're going to start thinking like we do.
Great. And so, Bill, now let's talk about it, kind of pivot a little bit in terms of ones that have worked. Now, one of the films that did work, as you mentioned, was, what was her name? Wonder Woman.
Yep.
And that was a surprise. And a lot of people, they're like, oh, no, they're going to do it again. Here comes, this movie trying to shove politics down my throat. But it ended up being a very good movie. And I know a lot of women, especially, who could really relate to her character. They really liked her character. And I see the same thing, I think, with the Black Widow movie coming out. I guarantee a lot of people are going to see it, and I guarantee a lot of people are going to like it. But how is that different from the ones that are trying to shove politics down through? What did Wonder Woman do that was different?
It turns out that there's a perfect example of two movies that came out, I don't know what the exact date is, probably within a year of each other. And one was a DC movie and the other one was a Marvel movie. The DC movie was Wonder Woman and the Marvel movie was Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel was reimagined as a woman from another planet who comes here complete with all the powers she needs. She brings her girlfriend fighter pilots with her. She does nothing but defeat men without any setbacks whatsoever. And her entire emotional pitch the whole time is, you're all scum. I don't need any of you. I'm better than all of you. I'm a superhero from another planet. On the other hand, Wonder Woman works because they had the good sense to understand that it's Wonder Woman. And even though she has super strength and speed and agility, In the Wonder Woman movie, they didn't take her femininity away from her. They didn't turn her into what they did with Captain Marvel, which was a killbot. She's not a killbot. Wonder Woman's not a killbot. She's not filled with invincible powers, but more importantly, she's not emotionally immune to the world. She loves this guy, and she's heartbroken when she sees this war and stuff, and she's disappointed and she's disillusioned, and she goes back and does it anyway. They made her into a real person. Wonder Woman is actually an extremely soft character underneath, and that's why people can identify with her. And strangely enough, virtually all the superheroes, I can't think of an exception off the top of my head, are soft underneath.
And so it's really the taking of an existing brand and using that brand as kind of a Trojan horse to carry something entirely different from what people have been accustomed to, and expecting people to, you have the name that relates to the story, and that's about it, right? Is this what you're getting at?
Yeah. I can give you some real clear examples. Needless to say, the whole Star Wars thing, which as we record this is going to open in a day or two, it's going to be, I think, a catastrophe. But I had thought when we talked last about this, I had thought that the end goal of the left was to simply retroactively destroy the Luke Skywalker character because he's a hero and he's young, white male. And I don't like talking in these terms, but this is how they play their politics, so that's how we have to respond. And I thought that the destruction of Luke Skywalker was their end goal, but I realized no, their end goal is the destruction of Luke Skywalker and then replacing him with their Luke Skywalker. So the last line in this upcoming movie is when Rey, this new character who hasn't done anything really, somebody says, "What's your name?" And she says, "Rey," and she says, "Rey Skywalker." And I realized then that what they're doing is they're taking this female character. They've already hollowed out the space where the male character used to be. So they've drilled all that out. And now they're going to take this and they're going to pack this female character in there, and they're going to give him the same name. So when people in the future think of Skywalker, of course they're talking about a young woman. But it's not working. And in fact, it's failing catastrophically. Ghostbusters 2016 is a really good example. They made Ghostbusters with 4 women. And I knew in advance that film's not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is not because women can't be funny or not because women can't act or make great characters. The reason it wasn't going to work is because Ghostbusters is a science fiction frat movie. And you can't translate that humor. It just, you can't turn it into a real talky kind of a, repartee kind of thing. Ghostbusters had a kind of a real loose kind of male bonding kind of thing where, oh, look, the dogs just came to life from these statues. Yeah, I hate it when that happens. That kind of thing only works when you've got this sort of relationship. So anyway, they decided they're going to make Ghostbusters in 2016, and they're going to make it with women, and it was a catastrophic failure. And it wasn't funny either. It was just terrible. It was just a bad movie. They did the same thing just a couple months ago with Terminator, where now the Terminator is female. And not only that, the first scene in the movie, and this is a really egregious and good example. The first scene in the movie is you see Sarah Connor, who we grew up with, as the mother of the leader of John Connor, who's the leader of the human resistance against the machines. And we've seen John Connor fighting these robots in 5 or 6 movies now. And the first thing that happens in this latest version of the Terminator is that a Terminator comes up out of the water, apparently on a beach, and kills John Connor, kills him dead. He's gone. He's dead. What? Yes. Then we find out that the person who's really leader of the human resistance is a young Mexican girl who we haven't spent any time with at all whatsoever. And the whole future of John Connor has been erased, but there's another future that features the exact same Terminators, and now it's this young Hispanic girl who's the leader of the upcoming human resistance. And if they had made a young Mexican girl the leader of the resistance in Terminator 2 or Terminator 1, then no one would have a problem with this. But to come in and to go and just to simply just say, no, everything you loved, they're dead. I just killed them on screen. You saw them die. So there's no question about it. It's canon now is the term, right? It's canonical. It's established. So we're going to kill off all the characters that you like. We're going to replace them, not with new characters. We're going to replace them with our version of your old characters, which are more appropriate for you now because they more reflect the values of a progressive age. And so this is what they're doing. They're taking Terminator and Ghostbusters and James Bond and Star Wars and Thor, and they are basically shoehorning women into these roles and expecting us to have the same degree of enthusiasm for it, and we don't. And I just got to add something here, because this point needs to be made, because of course when you criticize any of this, you're called a racist, and you're called a sexist, a homophobe, misogynist. You just can't handle strong women, or you're an old, you're a white male who's desperately clinging to his lost power. All of this trash and nonsense. This is so patently false on its face. Two of the great science fiction characters ever in movies are Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley from the Alien movies. And nobody watched Aliens, which the second movie was my favorite movie of all time personally. Nobody went in there and said, girl couldn't handle that. No, everybody was with her. Everybody was completely on board with her because she was a character that had started as a female. We watched her grow in the first movie. And in the second movie, she is forced to become this person, and everybody's on board. So to say that the audience can't handle strong women characters it's just a lie. And it's not just a lie, it's slander. It's slander designed to libel, I suppose, designed to force people away from legitimate criticisms of the films and the politics. And ultimately, buddy, when you get right down to it, that's what's really going on here. Nobody wants to buy what they're trying to sell. So they have to wrap it up in the same kind of wrapping of the products that we used to buy, and they expect us to continue to buy this stuff, and we open the wrapper and it's nothing like what it used to be.
That's an interesting analogy. I can imagine if you're trying to convince a kid that he wants this book, and he's like, no, I want the book you used to get me. I want the book you used to get me. And you're like, oh, well, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll get the book I used to get you. And you take the book you want to give him, you rip the cover off it.
Yes.
And you put the new one in it and say, okay, here you go. And the kid's like, great, this is what I wanted, and opens up like, hey, this isn't what I wanted. What is this? Yeah.
So doing that to a person is cruel. That's a cruel thing to do to a kid. But what the studios are doing to the fan base is that plus more cruelty, because they're not only handing them a book that had the cover ripped off of a book that they loved surrounding a book that they don't like. Not only are they doing that, but they're also saying to the kid goes, I don't like this. This isn't what I wanted. And now they're saying, well, of course it is. Of course it's the same book. No, it's not. No, it's not. The other book. No, I don't know what you're talking about. No. That never happened. Han never shot first. The green reptile guy shot first. And you can't see any versions of the original Star Wars movie where Han shot first. We talked about that on the last episode. It's gone. And so eventually, when people, this is their hope, they won't succeed, people will think, okay, what's the story of Skywalker? Skywalker, the hero. Oh, that's a young woman who's got these progressive attitudes. No. And when they try to convince you that that what you saw with your own eyes didn't happen, from a political point of view, it gives people like me a chance to talk to a younger and certainly more liberal generation about the fact that your history is being rewritten in front of your eyes. You know it and I know it. You know who shot first in that cantina scene, but they re-edited it and added special effects to turn the thing around to get you to think the way they want you to think now, not the way they wanted you to think then. And you not only are you forced to watch this, but you cannot get a hold of the original product that shows that you're not absolutely nuts. It's gaslighting is what it is. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it is a way to kind of gaslight the entire society.
And this ties into something I think that these old heroes all had. Every single one of them had an element of the everyman, right?
They had a tragic flaw.
And not just every man, but every woman too. I guarantee you,
right.
if you look at the entire, all the different Marvel heroes, everybody is going to be able to relate with at least a few of them, and at least several of their characteristics. And they could see, if I were thrust into a situation like that, how would I, there needs to be something relatable in it. You know what I mean?
Precisely correct, yes.
Yeah. And like you said, Ripley and, you talk about these movies that she was just doing her job, just run of the mill, doing her job, and then suddenly this monster's on board the ship and it's hunting her, and she does not want to be in that situation.
No,
but
she doesn't.
has
She
to
wants to
deal
get
with
as
it.
far away from there as she can. Exactly right. Now, you got it right on the head.
Yeah.
Exactly. She wants to get off that ship, and she does in the first one. And then in Alien, she wants to leave real badly. But she's got this young girl down there that is depending on her. And so her moral decision to sacrifice her own life and her own comfort and not just fly away and get the hell out of there, she's going to go back there and risk being killed. And she knows what the horror of these creatures is. And she's going to go back there because her promise to that girl is more important than her life and her safety. And that is the kind of model that people respond to. People go, I like this person. They earned it. They really did. And this is what you just mentioned is really the source of all of these things. The term in classical literature is a tragic flaw. Every one of the heroes of great mythology, especially the Greeks, because they're very, very clear about this. And by the way, Marvel fits right into the Greeks because the Greeks had kind of their fast guy. The Flash was Hermes. And then the super strong guy. The Hulk was Hercules or Heracles, and so they fit perfectly because that's what people want.
Right, and I know your specialty is this kind of intersection between politics and entertainment. And you mentioned that you were kind of hopeless. You didn't see a lot of hope with this, the issue with films until about, you said, I think 18 months ago. What happened? What happened that gave you hope, that changed your perspective on what's happening?
Well, what happened was the fan reaction to both Star Trek and Star Wars being filled with social justice warrior messages. They rebooted Star Trek as Star Trek Discovery, which isn't Star Trek. It's got the name on there. It's got nothing to do with Star Trek. Nothing. And we're told that this is what it's going to be now, and so here it is, and you better like it. And the same thing for Star Wars, and the same thing for video games. What has given me hope is the fact that these are being rejected. If it turned out that people were saying, "Oh, swell, great, we got a 94-pound Thor now, fantastic, we love it, we think it's awesome." If that were happening, I'd say it's game's over. But it's not happening, and that's when I realized it's not just a question of them not being able to pull off the execution. It's that what they're trying to do is impossible. It's impossible. You cannot tell an adventure story about a group of people. It's not possible. You can't do it. Even if you were to take a film like a film about a football team, let's say, their plane was crashed and everybody was killed and they have to start with a whole new team or something. You're going to do a story about a 40-person football team. You're not telling the story of 40 people. You're telling the story of 2 or 3 people who you're going to pick out. And so all of this collectivist junk, all of this social justice agenda is being shoved into these containers that they know people already like, and people are not going along with it. They're just saying, okay, well, if that's going to be your attitude, then here you go. You can have it back. We're just going to leave it on the floor. And that's exactly what's happening. They used to be, when this intentional undoing of Luke Skywalker happened, there was disbelief, and then there was outrage and anger, and then there was sorrow and grieving, and then there was just kind of a bitterness, and now it's like, I don't care. I don't care. So they've managed to destroy these franchises, and that's bad. But what they haven't managed to do is put their politics into them and have them succeed. In other words, the people who they're trying to shove this down the throats of have said, we don't want this, and we're not going to take it, even if it is Star Wars, or even if it is Star Trek, or even if it is Marvel. We're not buying it. We're not, because this is not what we fell in love with, and this is not what we want.
Interesting. And then, of course, we've seen as well that a lot of just to emphasize that there is a political agenda, a lot of the directors or individuals making these films oftentimes come out and start preaching about, why their film represents what they think it represents. I remember with Ghostbusters, they were saying, if you don't like this film, you're sexist.
That's right.
And, I mean, imagine you're a fan of Ghostbusters, and you're like, oh, great, Ghostbusters movie. Oh, wait, that's not Dan Aykroyd. This isn't like,
And it's not funny, yeah.
Yeah. And then you're like,
Racist.
I don't know if I like this. Well, you're obviously just a sexist. What do you mean I'm a sexist? I just don't like the movie. What do you mean, what are you talking about? And then what do people do? They're like, all right, I don't want to watch that. You know what I mean? They get pushed out of it by them attacking them like that.
Yes, and another political benefit. Look, I think this whole thing's a catastrophe. You can't just wipe away a culture's mythology like they're trying to do. But with that said, it certainly does give this millennial generation a much, much better idea. I mentioned just a few minutes ago about what it's like to watch history being rewritten in front of your eyes to suit them. But what you were just talking about is I think, even more obvious to them. In other words, they make a legitimate criticism about a movie based on content, based on plot holes, based on lack of continuity, on lazy writing, on poor plotting, bad acting, and all of it. They make a legitimate comment about a movie. And then they get called racist and sexist and misogynist and stuff. And for the first time, this generation is getting a dose of what we've gotten for the last 40 years, 50 years. Anytime you tried to criticize Barack Obama, it's because you hated black people. And now, if you're trying to criticize this Ghostbusters atrocity, that's because you can't handle strong women, and you're just a panicked, weak little man who doesn't have the spine to be able to deal with strong women characters. And it's a slur. And this entire generation has been defamed that way, and they don't like it. And they're not happy about it.
As a few examples, they took Thor, this mighty Norse god, made him this fat guy who plays video games, and now he's going to go drink beer in space. Right?
While his girlfriend, who's 5'2" or something and weighs 90 pounds, is going to take over the role. Yeah.
Yeah. They killed off Iron Man, and apparently now who knows what's going to replace him now. But what are some of the things they're doing now in terms of where it's heading? Because of course the first series of films now, they've designated that every film we've seen
it's
until
like
now.
It's the thing that ended with Infinity War, that whole kind of a timeline thing. Yeah.
And so that's its own package, and now it's a whole new one. And so they can do whatever they want with it now. What are they doing with it now?
Well, I don't really know. I'm happy to say that if you'd asked me this 2 months ago, I would have said they're going to just go straight ahead and continue to do what they're doing. But already there are signs that the pushback has been so great that finally the dollars are starting to speak a little louder than the politics. The Mandalorian is a new Star Wars product that's actually real Star Wars, and this is like putting a defibrillator on a corpse that's been dead for 22 minutes, and suddenly you get a little tiny bit of a heartbeat comes back.
Great. So, Bill, thanks again for being on Crossroads. Real pleasure having you on. Let's do it again sometime. Yeah.
I can't wait. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. And everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. Click that notification bell. See you next time.